What's what's going on, ballers? It's Jack and John back for Draft Man Standing here, and today we have some fun. I think this is going to be enjoyable for you guys. It's a little different than what we've done so far. As always, we'll wrap up with some first round predictions for what picks are we at here, John? 13 and 14?
I'm pretty sure. I know the Cincinnati Bengals and Washington Redskins.
Right, the Bengals and the Redskins. So before we get to the Bengals and Redskins, we're going to be discussing some underrated draft prospects in both the NBA and NFL. I'm going to get us started with the NBA here. So kicking it off, this isn't, I wouldn't say this really counts, but I think at this point in the draft process, at least in terms of maybe draft media, Luka Doncic is a little bit underrated. And, for a guy who's supposed to go in the top five, I know it's stretching it a little bit, but...
And for a guy that some people consider to be the best prospect of all of them.
Right. But I think...
But he's definitely fallen, as you're going to mention.
Yeah, he's fallen. He's slid a little bit. And partially, he's not shooting the ball great for Real Madrid over there, but the fact that he's putting up 16 points, 5.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, playing as one of the primary playmakers for Real Madrid as a guy who will turn 19 in just a few weeks here is remarkable, and he should be a surefire top 3 pick. The fact that he's not, to me, says he's a little bit underrated right now. And After this, I promise, that's the first one. That's the only one that's kind of borderline underrated. But I just thought it was important. He should be almost a top 3 lock.
Do you think that he's being underrated now because of the fact that he plays overseas?
Yeah, I think that's really the entirety of it. Mm-hmm. And, obviously everyone gets to see Bagley and Ayton and Trae Young play on a week-to-week basis. And so they don't get to see Doncic as much. So I think that's really all that's going on. And once we get to the end of the season, you'll see Doncic in the top 3 there. He just has too much of a combination of size, athleticism, and intelligence to not go in that top 3. Now, moving on here, for me, is another wing prospect who the Bleacher Report's NBA draft scout, Jonathan Wasserman, has been all over this season. And that's Chandler Hutchison, the forward from Boise State, who's improved each season now at Boise State and has now worked himself in from being, a fringe second-round undrafted guy at the beginning of the season to now he looks like he has a very real chance at going in the first round. And to make that kind of a jump as somebody from Boise State says something about his work ethic, the level of improvement he's shown this season, and his ability to affect the game in a number of ways. Averaging 20 points, 7.5 rebounds, 3.5 assists, there's a lot of abilities that Hutchison has that could translate to the next level. Lastly, I have 2 pairs of prospects here. Devontae Graham and Javon Carter is the first pair, 2 seniors who are just great guards. I think they're underrated because they're seniors personally, but they definitely both have a chance to make an impact at the next level. And Javon Carter, averaging over 3 steals per game, is phenomenal on that side of the court and has given Trae Young difficulties. Graham is also very good as a defender, but a bit of a better shooter, 42% from 3. And both these guys, I think, can come in to the league. May take them a little bit of time, but as seniors, they're going to work their way into rotations, I think, and find ways to make a contribution at the next level. I think one thing to note about seniors, and especially these guys, is they'll know how to fill a role, and that's going to be very important. Lastly, I have Keita Bates-Diop and Tyus Battle. Bates-Diop is the senior from Ohio State, Battle, sophomore from Syracuse. And both of these guys are NBA scorers in my estimation. And the fact that, Battle's not even in mock drafts for this season, and Bates-Diop is really a second-round guy in most mock drafts I've seen, is a bit criminal. Yes, both of these guys Well, Bates Diop has the size, and he's a good rebounder. Doesn't do much else besides that, but he can score from all three phases. And the same goes with Battle. Battle really needs to show he can do other things though, so I think he will have to come back to school. But on the other hand, at the end of the day, it's about scoring the basketball, and both of these guys can do it at a high level.
All right, Jack, those are your underrated NBA draft prospects. Now we're going to move into the NFL draft and talk about some of my underrated players so far that I've scouted. I'm going to start with a Florida State player. I've got two Florida State players on this list, and he's the guy who I think is actually the best player in this draft, and that's Derwin James, the safety who had a really great freshman year and then got hurt the next year, was redshirted after only 2 games, and then this year came back. Didn't look too bothered by his injury. He broke his leg. He didn't look too bothered by it. And, I didn't see very many weaknesses with Derwin James's game. He's athletic. He tackles well. He's physical. He's instinctive. I think he's ultimately going to be a strong safety. But I think that's because if you put him near the line of scrimmage, he can disrupt the run game. He can cover tight ends and running backs in zone or man coverage. And he's ultimately just going to be a chess piece that you can move around the field on defense. And the fact that he's right now being in the 15 to 20 range of mock drafts, I think is pretty crazy. I think he's going to be top 10 easily by the end of the season. And I really think he to me, he's the best player in this draft class.
John, we had another guy who plays strong safety, Jamal Adams, go top.
Right.
He went 6th to the Jets last season. What do you think is the difference in the games between Adams and Derwin James?
I think James is definitely more athletic. I think he's also better in coverage than Jamal Adams was. And coming out of LSU, I like Jamal Adams a lot, and I thought he was a good pick there for the Jets. But I had some issues with some of his tackling. His tackling was a little erratic at times, and I think James is just a much more fundamental tackler. So I think as good as Jamal Adams was coming out last year, I think James is even better. And I think whoever winds up picking him, whether he goes top 10, and I think he will, because I think he's going to go to the Combine, and he's going to show what a freak athlete he is, and everyone's going to kind of remember him. He's going to go to the Combine, have a great Combine, and then his name is going to be starting to be mentioned in the top 10 of drafts where it should be. That's what I think for Derwin James. Now, moving on to the other Florida State guy I have on this list, that's Auden Tate, the wide receiver. And there are a lot of guys who are being mentioned above Auden Tate, guys like Cortland Sutton and Christian Kirk, players who I don't necessarily think as wide receivers are as talented as Tate. I think Cortland Sutton, similar size, but not as athletic as Tate. And Christian Kirk, obviously a lot smaller, a lot quicker and faster, but he doesn't have the same level of polish with his routes and hands that Auden Tate has. And then Tate is 6'4", 225. I think he's going to go to the Combine and run, something like a 4.55 probably. He's fast enough to separate and be a deep threat. Obviously he's not Randy Moss or Plaxico Burress, who are just, guys with great height and somehow still great speed. He's got good speed. But I think that Tate is going to be at the next level, a number 2 right away, who can develop into a wide receiver 1 over time. I think his hands are as good as anyone's in this draft class. I think maybe only Calvin Ridley is better as a pure receiver than Tate. And I think just his size, his speed, his polish right now, it makes him such an enticing pick that I would definitely put him ahead of Sutton and Kirk among some of the other guys, Deion Kane. And I think at the end of the day, he's going to be better than some of those other guys and deserves to be drafted ahead of them, deserves to be a high second round, late first round type of guy. And then my final player here is Carlton Davis, the Auburn corner, who, hasn't been getting mentioned as much as some of the other corners in this draft class. And there's a bunch of good ones this year. But Davis, to me, is just really, really special. There's not a lot of things he does wrong. Being 6'1", 205, really long, rangy arms. He's got that size and that speed that NFL teams covet nowadays. And not only that, but he also has a good level of polish to him, good instincts and ball skills, very good in press man coverage, pretty good in run support as well. There's not a lot of things that I see that I dislike about Carlton Davis. I think obviously his skill set. He's not the biggest or quickest guy, so those wide receivers at the NFL level may be able to take advantage of him a little bit. He's a little handsy. He's just okay in off-man coverage. But other than some of those, flaws, which are not, huge flaws, I really think he can be a cornerback one in today's NFL. And I think he should be, a top 32 pick. He may wind up being that. And, I think if a team like, say, Seattle could pick him up, I think that would be perfect. Richard Sherman is getting up there in age. He's, starting to be less effective than in the past. And I think if you put Carlton Davis there with Shaquille Griffin.
Yep.
I think that'd be a really effective 1-2 combo there at outside corner. I think Davis, at the end of the day, I think he's going to be the third or fourth cornerback drafted in April.
Now, John, I've heard some positives about Carlton Davis. I've watched one game of his. The one thing I've heard and noticed a little bit was that, while he's great at the line of scrimmage in terms of his press coverage, there are some instances where he doesn't quite play the ball as well as he could, and he doesn't. The area he does great in terms of staying with the receiver, but he kind of can lose separation, if you will, when the ball's in the air. Have you seen that as well?
I thought his closing speed was pretty good. I thought his makeup speed was good as well. So I'm not too sure about that.
I think you're misunderstanding what I'm saying. I'm saying he does a good job staying with the receiver. That's what I'm saying. But when the ball is in the air, and
he doesn't track it.
Yeah, he doesn't track it as well.
Okay.
And that's where he kind of loses it.
I didn't see too much of that. Maybe I'll have to go back and look at it a little more. I thought his ball skills were pretty good. I thought he tracked it okay in the tape that I was able to watch. But yeah, I think maybe that's something you go back and check out and make sure that that's something he's doing well. I did notice he does get handsy downfield, which he's definitely going to have to improve at the next level, not to attract so many penalty flags if he doesn't learn to let go past 5 yards. But other than that, I don't think there's too much of an issue with him tracking the ball, at least in the tape that I've seen.
Yeah, and speaking of handsy, I know there's another corner, Anthony Averett, who wouldn't be in your underrated draft prospects, but he's definitely a bit handsy as he gets down the field as well. But moving on here, John, let's get into our first round predictions.
That's right.
So yep,
okay.
Go ahead.
So we are moving on here to the Washington Redskins, and the Skins here, picking, top half of the draft. They have a bunch of needs, clearly. With the Alex Smith trade, they're not going to have a third-round pick, so they're going to have to maximize what they get up out of the first 2 rounds. They have Alex Smith now, but you don't really have a long-term option. They did give him a 5-year extension, so he'll probably be there at least until he's not very effective anymore. And I still think Alex Smith has some years left. This year he clearly didn't look like he was slowing down at all. So they don't need to go get a quarterback right away, I don't think. I think they can wait a little while, maybe draft one later on in the draft. But I think you have a couple positions that they're going to be looking for. Wide receiver has to be one of them that they're at least looking at. Now, I don't know if there's anyone going to be worth taking where they're picking. Other than Calvin Ridley, I don't know if there's any other really first-round wide receiver. Euquemia St. Brown, or as I mentioned earlier, Auden Tate might be, near first-round status, but you're still kind of reaching a little bit. I think they should go ahead and take a running back. I would take Darius Geis if he's going to be there. He would just give them such a dynamic playmaker out of the backfield that they haven't had probably since Clinton Portis, really. He's going to be a great addition to the offense. He's going to give Alex Smith a running game, give him a running back who can shoulder the load. He's even better, I think, than Kareem Hunt was. I think he'll be better than that. So I think that would be one direction I could see them going in. I would see also corner. You have Rashad Breeland, who is a pending free agent. Josh Norman, who clearly took a step backward. And you traded Kendall Fuller in the Alex Smith trade. So there are some corner. They don't really have too many corners. You have Fabian Moreau, who's pretty solid. He was a rookie last year, but they definitely need some help there. So again, I don't know if there's any corner really. I think Denzel Ward and Josh Jackson will probably be off the board at that point. But maybe you go ahead and take someone like Carlton Davis or Isaiah Oliver, one of those guys, to plug next to Josh Norman. Or maybe they go ahead and go nose tackle. I think Vita Vea would be a good selection. Give them a true nose tackle to pair with Jonathan Allen and Ryan Kerrigan. I think that would make a lot of sense as well. So the Redskins can go a variety of different ways. To me, I would think about improving that defense and then maybe focus on the offense a little later.
Right. Yeah. The Redskins, they're an interesting team, I think, and really this area of the draft is usually a tough spot because teams don't have too many holes to fill necessarily, but they don't have great options at those spots. And so you have a team like the Redskins who, like you're saying, John, they haven't had a great running back in quite some time, although I will say Alfred Morris's season and a half there with Robert Griffin was quite good. But they do have P. Ryan and Chris Thompson, so they have players there, but they don't have necessarily a guy who's going to be a difference maker. And so it becomes where can you get, or really, for these teams, it should be best player available and trying to just get a difference maker at this point in the draft.
Yeah, I don't think best player available is a bad strategy either for Washington. But yeah, I think those are some of the directions they could go. Best player available, or trying to fill out the defense, corner, nose tackle, or trying to get a franchise back. But Jack, what do you think the Cincinnati Bengals are going to do? Speaking of a team with not a lot of holes, even though they kind of underachieved this year, defensively, you look at that defense, they're pretty loaded. They have some really solid players across that defense.
They do. They got big production from rookie Carl Lawson, who a lot of people, kind of slept on, I will say.
Not me. I did have him in the first round.
You did.
Quick plug.
Yeah.
Quick plug. Also, Jordan Willis, too.
Jordan Willis was solid. He didn't have quite the season, obviously, as Carl Lawson, but he had a good season as well. Therefore, they have a couple of young pass rushers. They have, obviously, Geno Atkins. As you said, John, the defense really, they have a number of playmakers on the defense. They have young corners, decent safeties. Really, maybe they look for a linebacker, but they got some play from Nick Vigil as well last season. They still have Burfict, Minter. There's still a number of linebackers there. Really, the first thing that came to mind, and I'm sure it does for everyone when it comes to the Bengals and their first-round pick, is the offensive tackle position, because that was what really held them back and caused them to come out with such a slow start in the beginning of the season. Neither Cedric Ogbuehi or Fisher panned out. The two tackles they took a couple seasons ago after they released Andrew Whitworth, neither one of those guys looks like a long-term answer. So tackle definitely appears to be a direction that they would be inclined to go in. And so you could look at, there's going to be several tackles available at this point in the draft. That is a positive, at least for the Bengals this season. Connor Williams, Mike McGlinchey, maybe Orlando Brown. There should be options for them at tackle. So I think offensive line is, where they're probably going to go 80%, 85%. But then I think there's 10, 15% chance they just go best player available. And to me, it's funny. One of John's underrated prospects was someone who I'd marked down here, which would be Derwin James,
Yes.
who I think could provide a spark to, while that Bengals defense was good, I think James could really, put them over to the next level and be that playmaker that defense could use, somebody who creates turnovers in the backfield.
Yeah, I agree. I think putting him at strong safety there with George Ayoka at free safety, I think that would be pretty solid. Thinking back to last year, imagine if the Bengals hadn't reached on John Ross, I believe at pick 10, and then went and got a real tackle like Ryan Ramczyk. That would have worked out so well for them. And instead of talking about the offensive line as such a huge need, you'd be talking about, okay, you have one cornerstone piece in Ramczyk, and maybe you can build around him in some of the later rounds instead of having to feel like you have to go out now and have to draft an offensive lineman or two within their first two picks, I would say. I think the Bengals, they'd be smart to look at offensive line round one. Connor Williams, Will Hernandez, Quentin Nelson, I don't think will be on the board by the time they pick.
Right.
Mason Cole, the center. There are a few guys that they can go pick, I think, at 14, where it might be a little bit of a reach, but that offensive line is so bad, and they lost Andrew Whitworth, as you mentioned, Jack, to the Rams in free agency. They also lost Kevin Zeitler to the Browns in free agency as well. So I think that entire offensive line, besides Clint Bowling, I think that entire offensive line can be overhauled from center to guard to both tackle positions. I think they're going to have to take an offensive lineman, and if not in the first round, if they decide to go best player available, if they take someone like Derwin James, then definitely in the second round with one of those other guys, maybe a guard like Isaiah Wynn or Braden Smith.
Yeah, look, this week's teams, both of them have been poorly managed in recent years, and it looks like both of them, in the case of the Redskins, probably are going to, you said running back, but I think wide receiver could be just as valid, especially if Ridley's still there. After they invested, first round pick so recently in Josh Doxson, they just lost Deshaun Jackson and Pierre Garçon. They had so much invested in the wide receiver position, and now that it seems they have to go back out and get a new one. Same goes for
the deal to Terrell Pryor.
Exactly,
deal,
and that didn't pan out at all. And now the same goes for the Bengals, who, as John was saying, may have to double dip on offensive line because it has gotten so bad. And they just did that a couple seasons ago with the picks.
Right, with Fisher and Abuehi.
Exactly. So, it just goes to show you, and as John said, the John Ross pick, which at the time neither one of us thought made any sense in the world.
Yeah.
And now, it is coming back to really bite them as, you never want to go into a draft with needs, and the Bengals sure have them up front.
Yeah, they have a lot of needs up front, and hopefully for their sake they're able to find a few players in free agency or in the draft that can help poor Andy Dalton stand upright this coming season. And it remains to be seen if John Ross can be a consistent contributor. I thought he was, a good wide receiver, not a great one. And next to A.J. Green, he should be okay. But this year, they're going to have to find an offensive lineman or two in the draft. They're just going to have to. And they're going to have to hope that their defense continues to play well and that Andy Dalton can stay upright and they can try and get back to the playoffs.
All right, well, that's it for Draft Man Standing. We'll catch you guys next week, Tuesday, 6:30. Peace.